Dr. Carl Rogers died on February 4th, 1987, just following his 85th birthday from a fall at home. He lived in La Jolla, California with his wife Helen, whom he met at Wisconsin University. He also left behind a son, David, and a daughter, Natalie, who was also a psychologist. His parents were Walter and Julie Rogers, and he had 4 brothers and 1 sister. Dr. Rogers grew up in Oak Park, Illinois, as part of a fundamental Christian family. This family had high expectations for their children, and they were allowed few interactions outside of family and church. They were considered to be a high-standing family in Oak Park. A formative experience for Dr. Rogers was being chosen as an international delegate during his undergraduate degree at the University of Wisconsin to take a trip to Peking, China. This trip opened his eyes to different cultures and points of view. After this trip, he began adopting more liberal views in opposition to his family's views. He also began eschewing his religious beliefs. Eventually, Dr. Rogers became an atheist. He met his wife at the University of Wisconsin, then attended graduate school at the liberal Union Theological College. He then transferred to the Teachers College at Columbia University to study applied psychology. Throughout his career, he was the director of the Rochester, New York Children and Family Service Center and also the director of the Ohio State University Counseling Service. He was also involved in academia at the University of Chicago and the University of Wisconsin. As part of his therapeutic technique, he decided to use types of techniques that he thought would help himself and that involved unconditional love and acceptance. He worked on developing these techniques when he was a director of the counseling centers and during his academia career. Afterwards, he worked at the Western Behavioral Services Center and the Center for Studies of the Person that were both based in La Jolla, California, and based on his theoretical approach. He, towards the end of his career, founded the Carl Rogers Institute of Peace. Dr. Rogers was one of the founders of the humanistic branch of psychology. He founded this with the help of Dr. Abraham Maslow. This is considered the person-centered or client-centered therapeutic approach. This involves a warm acceptance of each aspect of the client's experience, and the most important element of it is developing a personal relationship between client and therapist. Since he developed this therapeutic approach, there's been a lot of empirical support gained for the strength of client-therapist relationship being important for outcomes in therapy. Also, the humanistic approach has been important in allowing counselors to have what feels like genuine interactions with their clients. So it's been widely adopted even in other therapeutic approaches. Dr. Rogers was a big proponent of research and data collection. He believed in the use of research in an applied versus a theoretical manner. He strongly considered ethics and decided that needed to be used in order for research to have social usefulness. He was one of the first to collect data to measure therapeutic effectiveness and also to record and review therapy sessions for reflections and learning. He's known for the Gloria films, which were filmed in 1964, which was a session that was recorded with a client named Gloria. Dr. Rogers thought that there were 6 conditions that were sufficient to improve the lives of clients. These conditions were given in his hallmark publication, The Necessary and Sufficient Conditions of Therapeutic Personality Change, in 1957. This was the basis for the client-centered or person-centered therapeutic approach. The first of these 6 conditions was to have a strong client-therapist relationship. The second was that something called incongruence or tension that was in the client that was caused by feeling their life is not as it should be was needed. Congruence and genuineness on the part of the counselor was the third condition. Unconditional positive regard toward the client was the fourth. Empathy was the fifth. And the sixth condition was that client must experience acceptance from the counselor. Again, although this is a strict person-centered or client-centered approach, many of these conditions, such as the unconditional positive regard toward the client, are used in other therapeutic approaches to this day. Dr. Rogers' later work centered on solving social problems. This work focused on humanistic approach principles as applied to political systems, religious systems, and work situations. He created what were called encounter groups, and these encounter groups were used to facilitate understanding between people. He felt like if different groups who would not typically sit down with each other and talk could sit down and talk, that there would develop some understanding between the groups. And so that would cause the ability for this understanding would allow them to be able to solve some of these social problems. So as I mentioned before, later in life, he created the Carl Rogers Institute of Peace to try to facilitate these encounter groups. Some of the encounter groups he's more known for are the Rust Workshop, where he sat down with Sandinistas and Contras in the Nicaraguan conflict and used these principles to try to solve social problems. He was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize based on this work. Another encounter group that he's known for is sitting down and working with Irish Catholics, Irish Protestants, and British participants in encounter groups. Other notable achievements for Dr. Rogers were that he was the president of the American Psychological Association, or the APA. He received the award for distinguished scientific contributions from the APA and the award for distinguished professional contributions to psychology. He also is known for initiating the expansion of counseling centers and published many books, the most notable of which are The Treatment of the Problem Child, Counseling and Psychotherapy, and On Becoming a Person. And a little bit of intrigue about Dr. Rogers. There was a 1977 New York Times article that was published due to information obtained through the Freedom of Information Act, and it exposed that Dr. Rogers' initial funding for this person-centered approach that he used came from the Society for the Investigation of Human Ecology. This was later exposed through the Freedom of Information Act to be a CIA front. And so others that were getting funding from this group, the information and the research being performed was being used for covert purposes. However, Dr. Rogers strongly denied that his research was used for these purposes and said he only got a few small grants from them.